Hello everyone and welcome to Game 3 of the World Chess Championship 2021. It's C88 with the white pieces against Magnus Carlsen. They've already played two games, both games ended in a draw, and everyone's been wondering whether we're gonna see a repetition of the sort of an anti-martial we've had in Game 1, where instead of the martial attack with c3 d5, white went h3, but now it's a little bit of a different story, but it's kind of why we're here. Because players will play something and then of course themselves and their seconds will try to improve on that, try and look for missed opportunities, deadly ideas in what already happened in the previous game, and try to employ it in the next game where Nepo or Magnus will have the white pieces. And this is something that was attempted here. So let's check it out what happened. But before we check it out, a quick detour to a few photos. So let's just check out this photo. So this is the beginning of Game 3, Magnus arriving, and you can already see that the handshake has begun well before Magnus actually reached the table. So it's hard to say when he even started doing the handshake. It could be like maybe 3 steps back. I mean, it could be even halfway through, but as you can see, still no eye contact. Magnus probably staring at Nepo's palm, and Nepo very much fixated on Magnus's palm. Maurice there this time looking at Magnus. That could be very dangerous, as we've seen in the past, but he's living the wildlife, and that's all there is to the handshake. Still nothing spectacular in the photos. Many corporate logos here, and well, as usual, if you guys can spot anything interesting about the photos, do let me know in the comments. I would like to point out that Nepo's coffee or whatever he has looks very futuristic. You can see it's sort of like something that you would see in a Star Trek episode. It looks very flashy. So I imagine that's coffee in there, but it could also be some herbal tea, maybe Earl Grey, like Picard is having. Who knows? But okay, going forward, here we have the first move being made. The first move was made by Anastasia Mishkina, former Russian tennis player, and she played d4 on the first move, but Nepo was not very interested in that. He wanted to play a real game, and he of course retracted that d4 move and well, continued with something else, but we'll get back to that. Now let's check out the game. So Nepo with the white pieces retracts this d4 move and plays e4. So we will probably see what we've already seen in game 1. Magnus goes e5, we have knight to f3, knight to c6, and now bishop to b5. The Ruy Lopez is on the board. We have a6, Morphy's defense, bishop to a4, and now knight to f6. So everything the same as in game 1. We have castles, bishop to e7, and rook to e1. We have b5, challenging the light square bishop here on a4, bishop back to b3, and here Magnus castles. And now here in game 1 we were wondering, will we see a martial attack with c3 and d5, but in game 1 we saw h3, sort of the anti-martial, but here we have the actual anti-martial with a4. This is known as the anti-martial variation, so white is trying to avoid complications that arise after c3 and d5, although it's not excluded that we will see a martial attack in one of the games, but as you can bet your life that Magnus is extremely prepared for that, so I don't know if there's a good reason for Nepo to even attempt such a thing. And here, as this is still all very much standard theory, I would just like to point out to this photo. You can see that Nepo is away from the board staring at Magnus, and pretty much as soon as Nepo makes a move, he leaves the board, and he is very rarely seen at the table. So most of the photos of Nepo are actually of him away from the table. You can see that gentle look that he's giving Magnus, hoping for him to blunder, but that's pretty much all he can do when it's not his move. But okay, here we have a4, the anti-martial variation. Like I said, h3 was played in game 1. Here we have a deviation from game 1, bishop to b7, and now d3. We have d6 and knight b to d2. So all very standard stuff, nothing out of the ordinary here. Usually black will go with something like knight to a5, attack the bishop, white will go back, and black will go for this c5 push, as the knight now made way for the pawn. But here we have rook to e8. Again, very standard idea. The bishop has to come to f8. Then the rook will gain some more activity along the e file, and also the bishop on f8 will be used very nicely to defend the g7 pawn. Knight to f1 by Nepo, going for that knight to e3 or knight to g3, depending on what white plays. We have h6 and bishop to d2. We have bishop back to f8. That's how you play this. And now knight to e3. And here we have knight to e7. Interestingly, this position was reached in a game in the 90s between Anatoly Karpov and Efim Geller, where knight to d7 was played. Karpov was able to win that game, but now as we do have the engines, we know that we can just listen to them, and hence knight to e7. We have c4 striking against this b5 pawn, and Magnus says, all right, I don't mind trading my b pawn for a c pawn, so b captures on c4. And now there is one game in the database where bishop captures on c4 was played, but here we have knight captures on c4 by Nepo, and it is now as of move 15 that we have a completely new game. And now one would expect, as Magnus already played knight to e7, that he wants to go knight to g6, but no, he instead goes back knight to c6. He wants to have some more pressure here against this d4 square, as you are expecting Nepo to play d4 at some point. It's a backwards pawn. You do not want this weakness on d3 forever, so it's a pretty sure bet. We have rook to c1. Nepo puts a rook on the nice semi-open c file, and Magnus plays a5. Grabbing more space on the queen side. Now knight to b4 can be played, also bishop to a6, you've made room for that, and all in all you prevent white from executing a5 anytime soon. So here we have bishop to c3. Nepo puts his bishops on this beautiful diagonal, or rather these beautiful diagonals, and Magnus now needs to find how to counter this. So of course he says, all right, those bishops are extremely powerful, I will counter them, and he goes bishop to c8. So he wants to play bishop to e6 and counter the bishop on b3. And now, as Magnus allowed it, Nepo plays d4 and gets rid of his backwards d3 pawn. So Magnus captures, we have e captures on d4, knight captures, and now queen captures with this powerful bishop-queen battery, but Magnus is ready for this as the bishop is already on f8 guarding the g7 square, so the knight can freely move if needed. We have bishop to e6 by Magnus, and now h3. Gaining control of that g4 square, getting some breathing room for the king. We have c6. Magnus also wants to play d5. He does not want any backwards pawns. And now bishop to c2. Nepo shifts the attention of this bishop to this diagonal now, and Magnus executes this central thrust with the d5. So d5, and now what do you do here? Well, you could say, all right, let's trade on d5, and this is now definitely equal, because you know, even without checking anything, that if you capture here, that's not going to bring you anything good. So Nepo has to try and create some imbalances in the position. He does have the white pieces, so it is expected of him. He goes e5, challenges the knight on f6, and now Magnus captures on c4. We have d captures on c4. Queen captures on d8, we have a queen trade. Of course, this rook is stuck here guarding the a5 pawn, so Magnus has to capture with the e8 rook. So rook e captures on d8, and now we have e captures on f6, grabbing that knight. And now, of course, you do not want to capture here and allow something like bishop captures on f6. Magnus just goes bishop to b4. And this is another fine example of just tucking your bishop in for later use. Now the bishop comes into b4, and of course, if the bishop is captured, then black will get a very nice pawn chain here. So f captures on g7, Magnus has to capture on c3, we have b captures on c3, and now king captures on g7. And now we have this endgame where both players have two rooks and the bishop, and the number of pawns is the same, 5 pawns each. But if you look at the position, Nepo has 3 pawn islands, whereas Magnus has 4 pawn islands. Here, the A pawn island, the C pawn island, the F and the H, and also his C pawns are doubled. So it's hard to evaluate the position, but if you had to pick a side, you would say, all right, I'll take white here. So king to f1, Nepo starts bringing the king into the game. We have rook a to b8. Of course, Magnus puts a rook on the nice open b file. Rook to b1, Nepo counters that rook, and now king to f6. Magnus also improves the activity of his king. We have rook captures on b8, rook captures, and now rook to b1, offering a trade of another pair of rooks, and we have captures and captures. And now we have this endgame where it's a bishop against the bishop. The bishops are of the same color, so usually that can be exploited very well, but here it's the exact same amount of pawns. Yes, Magnus does have 4 pawn islands, but it's very hard to make something of this, because as you can see, Carlsen has the a5 pawn and the h6 pawn on dark squares, and these pawns that are on light squares, they're very close to the king and the bishop, so they can easily defend them. So it's not easy for Nepo to find any targets, and you can be sure that these pawns are going to dark squares very, very soon. So basically the only pawn that will remain on a light square is the c4 pawn, and that's very nicely protected by the bishop. So not a lot for Nepo to do here. We have king e5, king to e2, and now f5 by Magnus. We have bishop to c2. Like I said, there's not all that much for Nepo to do here. He can, well, pretty much just repeat moves. We have f4, nicely placing this pawn on a dark square, bishop to b1, and now c5. And now you can see that all of Carlsen's pawns are on dark squares, except the pawn on c4, which is on a light square, but very well defended by the bishop here. So not a lot to do. Nepo just repeats bishop to c2. We have bishop to d7, and now f3. We have king back to f6, h4 now by Nepo, and the king back to e5. We have king to f2, and now king to f6, king to e2, we have king to e5, and king to f2, and it was in this position on move 41, as soon as time control was reached, that the players agreed to a draw, as there really isn't anything you can try here. It's a dead draw, and the players, of course, know this. So Nepo did not get all that much from his game with the white pieces here in game 3 of the World Chess Championship. He did try this a4 idea instead of h3, although there was a lot more poison in the game when the h3 variation was employed. Here with a4, you see just how well prepared Magnus is, and he completely neutralized everything Nepo had to throw at him, but there really wasn't all that much to throw here. So that's not really going to work, and Magnus really showed it this game. We'll see what Nepo prepares in game 5, but now in the next game, in game 4, will be very interesting to see. Will we have a repetition of the Catalan from game 2? What will happen, because there was so much poison in that game. So I don't know if, even though if they worked on the variations, you know, the entire day or the entire second day, will they even repeat it, because it's very, very deadly. But it will be interesting to see if they go for it or they choose something else. So yeah, that's the game 3. It was a fairly quick draw. Hope you guys enjoyed that. I would like to thank Happy Birthday Tanmai, Tom Deralo, Tudor Buburzan, BusinessCoachAcademy.com, and Hoti family for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the World Chess Championship until it ends. See you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.